So Brie Larson, who's an actress who should have been on people's radar for a while now, but I feel like popped for most of the world last year in that King Kong movie, and she's slated to be Captain Marvel, and thus a pop culture fixture from now until pretty much the heat death of the universe, so made some big waves recently at the Crystal and Lucy Excellence in Film Awards. Don't be embarrassed, I had to look up what that is too, when during an acceptance speech she cited the results of a recent USC Annenberg's Critics' Choice research study, which found that despite notable strides toward increased inclusion and diversity in the field of journalism, the vast majority of film criticism was still being written by white men, like me. I mean, she didn't say, like me. I have no reason to expect that she even knows who I am, right? I mean, that would be pretty unlikely because, look, moving on. Anyway, she went on to say that while she herself has nothing against white men, which I don't think anyone needed her to clarify, but okay, she, for one, would like to hear a more diverse set of voices, particularly as concerns films that may speak thematically or aesthetically to critics from backgrounds beyond the established paradigm of me. Citing as a go-to example Ava DuVernay's divisively reviewed big-budget Disney adaptation of A Wrinkle in Time from earlier this year, and building to an announcement that both the Sundance and Toronto film festivals had pledged to earmark a minimum of 20% of their press invites for the coming year to minority critics to help facilitate more representative coverage. This, predictably, touched off a bit of a tempest in the internet teapot, partly because if the press didn't have lady celebrities to drag on social media, we might have to cover things like the federal government building child concentration camps on the southern border, and also because I think Larson's particular choice of A Wrinkle in Time was an instance of Mr. Miyagi level, let me walk you into the exact response I want you to have in order to make my point for me, rhetorical trolling, as it's been in my experience that the same I'm a pretty progressive guy, but guys in my industry most likely to get riled up about this sort of thing are also the same guys who've always had the knives out for DuVernay for, well, reasons. Still, there's at least a performative logic to some of the knee-jerk reactions to this kind of suggestion. Obviously, there are more important determining factors in whether or not you're qualified to be writing about film or anything else than your background, gender, or ethnicity. Being a black woman doesn't automatically render you more qualified to review Girls Trip, just as being a white man doesn't automatically render me more qualified to review Lord of the Rings. Although I guess, like, if you were a hobbit, like an actual hobbit, then you might be more qualified for that one in that specific circumstance. That's a whole other thing, though. And of course, in a perfect world where all things were equal, history having been completely different for all of, well, history, systemic racism wasn't still a thing. Did I mention the child concentration camps for predominantly Latino migrant children a while ago? Because that's a thing that's going on right now, and I think it's okay to mention it twice. And it could be guaranteed that no assumptions were ever made about hiring, firing, promotions, assignments, etc. Of course, what we'd all want and should be nonetheless striving for is a scenario where the only question is the objective caliber of the work, the content of one's character, mountaintops, horizons, dreams, etc. But okay, those are all questions of implementation, right? Whether or not Sundance or Toronto should be making a specific point to ensure their guest list is more diverse, whether editors and publishers should be specifically looking to hire more critics from backgrounds other than straight white guys, and how you go about that, those are logistical questions, and there are real practical disagreements to be had about what the proper mechanics are, especially given the tendency of overeager workplaces to overcorrect from disenfranchisement all the way to tokenism. That said, the side of the discussion I'm more interested in weighing in on is the more fundamental question of what difference any of this is actually supposed to make, since that's the knee-jerk response that people who aren't immediately on board for things like this generally go to. Is it really a huge problem that most film critics come from the same type of background when your background isn't the sole or ideally even the most determinative thing about your ability to engage and report on a movie or TV show or any other piece of media? After all, the same quote-unquote progressive voices that are stumping for this kind of diversity in writing about films are usually also the ones encouraging mainstream audiences to get outside their comfort zone and seek out movies from sources, genres, styles, eras, countries, even languages not necessarily their own. So if a viewer can be expected to appreciate a film with seemingly little immediate connection to their experience because of the universality of visual storytelling, emotional narrative, human experience, etc., why shouldn't the same be true for the critics? As counter-arguments go, I guess that's not bad. For that matter, neither is the opposite pushback against the assumption, often but by no means always implicit, that the primary or even one of the significant rationales for seeking greater diversity in the criticism field is that somehow certain films made by and or starring women, minorities, people of color, other marginalized communities, etc. might get better reviews or at least a fairer shake if the field of reviewers featured more writers that could connect with them on a more personally nuanced level, which is, okay, the second part of that is the start of a good instinct, but there's a lot wrong with the first, no matter how sincerely well-intentioned. Firstly, it's more than a little patronizing to suggest that the solution solution to getting better reviews for a black film or a female-centric film is to simply increase the number of black or female critics because they're automatically going to hand out positive reviews in lockstep. Secondly, it feeds into the idea that the main or only instance where mainstream outlets should be focused on diversifying their roster of criticism voices is when corresponding films are playing, like, uh-oh, that movie Crazy Rich Asians is gonna be a big hit, we better make sure we've got a few Asian people on staff to write about it when it does. I mean, okay, yeah, you should, but you should also assign them to write about, like, Infinity War and Heredity and all the other kinds of movies that come out, too. But back to that first part again, because that's where I think a lot of the discourse... Sidebar, are you sick of that word yet? I don't remember when it came back into fashion, but I'm getting real sick of everyone in media feeling the need to say the discourse to each other as if everyone can't tell that it's just code for having to keep looking at Twitter all day even though everything is terrible. Anyway, I think this is where people get stuck in the weeds on this topic. Specifically, I feel like it betrays either a fundamental misunderstanding by a lot of the general public, or if I'm being charitable, disagreement with me by the general public, as to what the purpose and function of film criticism as a genre of media writing is actually for. See, I get that the primary reason that people read or listen to or watch movie reviews is to find out whether or not a movie is good and if they should go watch it. I get that. It's not what I generally use it for. I generally just go see as much that even vaguely interests me as I possibly can, and reviews of all types are either supplemental to that experience or serve the purpose of letting me know that things exist so I can go check them out for myself, but I'm not everyone, and that's why people with my proclivities in that direction do this for a living. But the modern way we consume reviews, where it's become less about the content of what the individual critic has actually written than the tomato meter score or Metacritic or the star rating or whatnot, it reduces everything down to this binary good or bad, yes or no, sucks or rocks consumer reporting sort of outlook that's bad in general and really bad for nuance, as in the details where a given film is maybe not the best, maybe not the worst, but has certain elements that might elevate or lessen it otherwise in the eyes of one reviewer or another, and it's those nuances where the medium of film criticism having as diverse an array of differing voices as possible is important, from my perspective at least. I mean, think about your favorite movies, not necessarily the ones you think should have won awards or the best by some kind of academic metric, whatever that means. I mean the stuff you like to watch a lot, your go-tos. Chances are, not all of them are quote-unquote great films, and you probably acknowledge that, and if pressed as to why they're your favorite, you'll probably come up with explanations like, well, there's this one great part where, or it just puts me in a great mood because, and I'd be willing to bet that in more than a few cases, the cited rationale would have to do with you relating to a movie or something in it in a way that's specific to you and your experience, your life, also known as your background. Because background can mean a lot of things in this context. Maybe you're big into fitness and you still feel Pumping Iron captures the bodybuilding scene better than any other film on the subject. Maybe you're an aspiring musician and Straight Outta Compton really spoke to you. Maybe you come from a military family and a certain war film speaks to you in that respect. Or maybe in a more explicit vein, for whatever reason, films like Rosewood, The Joy Luck Club, Edge of 17 spoke to you in a personal way. I can't tell you how often now, 17 years after the fact, I've heard friends and colleagues of Latino background mention that the Spy Kids movies, which at the time I always thought of as, fine, decently harmless kid stuff on average, were this huge deal for them growing up because you just didn't see a big mainstream family comedy about a family that looked like theirs anywhere else, which had never occurred to me, but makes total sense. In any case, you being you are bound to see something in a certain film that reaches you in a way it won't reach anyone else, but by being able to articulate why and share that enthusiasm, or on the flip side, some particular aspect of some film that's always bothered you, may end up pointing people in the direction of giving a chance to something they may also find interesting on that level, or similar, which I think is a both more interesting and also much more, dare I say, important function of film criticism as a vocation than the simple question of telling people what you think is good or not, and a greater diversity of voices means a greater diversity in those kinds of nuances. It's not about whether or not more female film critics would have meant 50 Shades of Grey getting a positive overall score instead of not, or fewer white critics meaning La La Land not being so overhyped. Frankly, it's not even really about anything to do with the really big hits or the really big bombs. Like, the feedback on that Tom Cruise Mummy thing were bad across the spectrum. Nobody liked that fucking thing. And on the flip side, Black Panther did good with pretty much everybody. Like, even for one of the Marvel movies, that one checked off every box. It's the go either way stuff in the middle and the general deeper discussion of everything that goes deeper than should I see it where this comes into play. By which I mean film criticism shouldn't just be something you read to decide what to see. It should be something you read after, long term, in hopes of gaining a greater understanding of what it is you liked or disliked. Feel free to take that with a degree of skepticism, because yes, obviously I have a professional interest in people wanting to read more criticism, but I promise you, sincerely, that's how I felt about it before I got into this game, and in many respects why I'm here in the first place. And perhaps before this gets too drawn out and repetitive, maybe most crucially, it can help you understand something more than you might otherwise have, and thus appreciate something in a context different enough to actually change your mind. One of my favorite movies, no bullshit, is Japanese director Takashi Miike's 1999 Yakuza crime thriller Dead or Alive, not to be confused with the movie based on the Dead or Alive video games, which I also enjoy for different reasons. Anyway, Miike's Dead or Alive is just fucking amazing, just a non-stop sex, drugs, violence, guns, blood, extreme gore, spectacle spectacle thing that's also a played totally straight, dead serious crime drama about a dedicated cop trying to stop a renegade gangster who's waging war against the more prominent members of the Yakuza and Triad crime families and threatening to tear the entirety of urban Japan apart at the seams to do it. Like, imagine Tony Montana versus the Corleones and, like, Popeye Doyle has to fight all of them, but in Japan. That's the movie. It's fucking awesome, and just go watch it. Just watch it. Trust me. I mean, trigger warning for, Jesus, every conceivable thing, but watch it, go in cold, knowing nothing but Japanese cops versus gangster movie, watch it all the way to the end, and then show it to someone else without telling them why you can't tell them anything else about it. Just trust me, you're gonna want to do that. Anyway, the first time I watched it, I was blown away by the sheer style, energy, pure filmmaking prowess, and you'll see. But I didn't necessarily know that it was great or that I loved it because I wasn't sure I was connecting with it on a deep level beyond all that style and sizzle that it felt like it intended me to. See, in the film, Riki Takuchi is the rebel gangster who starts the mob war that he intends to win and finish himself, and he has his own family gang that's mostly younger, poor, lives on the fringes, and there's a running theme that the other syndicates have looked down on them for reasons. And hey, class warfare within criminal hierarchy is inevitably part of any good mob thriller, but I initially came away feeling like this was building to the reveal of the reason why this tension was there, and it's not. It just kind of feels assumed, which felt incomplete to me at the time. But since I was so into every other level of the film so much, I read all of the other reviews I could find about it, including reviews and critics and film writers from and or with an expertise in Japan, and from those I ultimately learned a detail about their character, and apparently so easily understood and immediately apparent to a Japanese audience so as to not require any discernible major highlight that I had recalled from my first viewing, though translation is often an imperfect science, that unlocked a whole extra layer. See, the character and his gang are meant to be understood as hailing from Japan's Zanryo-koji community, i.e. descendants of ethnically Japanese war orphans raised in China during and after World War II who later faced prejudice and oppression upon repatriation to Japan owing to seeming more Chinese than Japanese in their language, mannerisms, and culture, and are often regarded as discriminated underclass to this day. And just like that, bang, there was the subtext I'd been missing, and also once I knew to look for it and saw it again with better subtitles and caught a few more stray lines of dialogue that made more reference to it, the whole thing took on an entirely new depth of character and understanding, which ultimately transformed it from a movie I merely liked into a movie I genuinely love, in large part because the only thing more ballsy than doing what Dead or Alive does, just to do it, is doing it in the context of an actual movie with real stand-on-its-own character depth and socio-political dramatic weight. And while yes, ideally, we'd all like to know more about one another's cultures for things like that to be fully universal, that's not how the world works, and in cases like that, more voices from a greater variety of backgrounds means more ideas and information out there and available for you to read and increase your understanding, give you more to think about, give you more films to see that you may not have otherwise heard of, and give you more perspective on films that you liked or disliked that you may never have thought of on your own, and that, to me, is the real benefit to having a greater variety of voices in this medium, which, I guess, yes, is a very long way around to the original point in the title. Regardless of how you felt about the way she phrased it or the example she used, Brie Larson is very much right about this one. I mean, with the possible exception of invoking the whole "this movie wasn't made for you" line of argument, that whole thing never ends in a good place, so maybe dial it back on that, but everything else pretty much on the money, I would say, in this one person's opinion. Hey gang, here's a question that keeps coming up. If your handle is Movie Bob, where are your movie reviews? Well, my old reviews are in a lot of places. You'll find many of them on my YouTube channel, but you'll find the brand new ones on Geek.com, an awesome site that's also your one-stop news source for science, TV, gaming, technology, nerd culture, the works. You can find all my reviews directly by going to geek.com/author/bchipman, because that's my real name, and you can get regular updates on all my reviews and all of Geek.com's other great content by signing up for their kick-ass newsletter at subscribe.geek.com. And don't forget to also subscribe to the Geek.com YouTube channel, where you'll find the videos that accompany my reviews and tons of other great content too. Remember, that's Geek.com, the Geek.com newsletter, and Geek.com on YouTube. Make sure you don't miss out on all the latest Movie Bob reviews. You can also check out my own new website, Movie Bob Central, where you'll find my blog, links to all my work, and shop for my books, ebooks, and future Movie Bob products. And please remember to like these videos, share them with all of your friends, and subscribe to this channel. Thank you for watching another Movie Bob production.